Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining us. I'm hoping you've all had a good days. I appreciate it's the end of a Wednesday and you may be feeling a bit tired, but we're going to talk today about project management. I apologise to anyone who's actually a very good project manager, and if this feels like teaching grandma to suck eggs, as the expression goes, but hopefully you're going to find it useful. And we're going to talk more about project management in the cohort sessions that we do with you as part of Producer Hub. So we'll put it into context when we get back into the university at the next session. But this is just a helpful bit of background to make sure we're all on the same playing field as we go. I'm going to talk at you, I'm afraid, for a little bit, but kick back and listen, and I hope it's useful. My preference would be if you've got any questions, you can either pop them in the chat, and Isaac will let me know at the end, and we can answer them then. So you might want to make a note of any questions as we go, and Isaac will flag if there's anything at all that's a problem. If you've got any tech problems with the call and you can't hear, or there's something going on with the Zoom and I haven't noticed, again, pop something in the chat and Isaac will do what he can to help. Okay, brilliant. So project management. For anyone who's watching this recording and doesn't know the background about BCA, very quick introduction. We are an arts charity that does socially engaged work. So we work across all art forms, lots of different projects. We're also a national portfolio organisation of Arts Council. So that means that some of our project work and our staffing and overhead costs are covered by Arts Council funding, including our contribution to Producer Hub. Producer Hub is otherwise run in partnership with us by 1 Degree East, who work across the East region and run producer hubs in Kent, Norwich, Luton and other places. And it's all about nurturing producers. And the way we do it is we mentor 10 people once a year across the year to try and help them develop their projects and their skills. But we do things like this where we're quite happy for other people to learn along the way and watch webinars or be part of networking events if it helps them develop as well. So what am I going to cover today? I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think project management is. I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between being a producer versus being a project manager, because I think those two terms get used sometimes interchangeably, and I'm going to argue that there's a difference. We'll talk a bit about best practice, and then I will talk about some templates and tools for you that might be helpful. And there will be a bit of time for you to ask questions at the ends. I will make sure that these slides get sent out to you afterwards, so you don't need to copy down things off the slides. You will get a PDF copy of those, so don't feel you need to take notes as you go. So what is project management? So I am a Prince 2 trained project manager. And if you've never heard of that before, Prince 2 is a particular standard of a project management. Prince stands for Projects in Controlled Environments. It's a bit of a heavy-handed approach to project management, and it's used in lots of different sectors, from construction to local authorities and everything in between. So a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about is a Prince 2 approach to doing project management. But I think it can apply to everything. And this is how they define project management. It's the planning, delegating, monitoring and control of all aspects of a project to achieve its objectives within the expected performance targets for time, cost, quality, scope, benefits and risks. Sounds a bit long, but actually it's very all-encompassing. What you'll notice is it doesn't talk about anything creative. And so that's the big distinction. When you're managing a project, that is not the creative part of the work. It's the logistical doing and planning of a project. So it doesn't need to be done by a creative producer, which is something I'd really like you to think about. Because if you're an artist and your talent is being creative, you might find that it's the project management stuff that you need help with. But I also appreciate that sometimes you're having to project manage your own project because it's only you and you might need to wear all the hats, but it's worth making those distinctions between what's a creative producing piece of work and what's just getting stuff done. To simplify that definition, I'm going to argue it's basically saying what needs to be done, when does it need to be done by, and who needs to do it. So if a funder ever asks you to produce a project plan, the simplest thing you could do is actually draw a table and just put those headings at the top. What, when, and who, and that is, in all essence, a project plan. Prince 2 has certain principles, which I think are really helpful actually in thinking about projects, and I think they're worth you having a think about. If you're going to be a Prince 2 project person, all you have to do is follow these principles. You don't have to do anything more complicated than that. And the first one is, when you're doing a project, try and remember why you're doing it. And that's because one of the things we're all guilty of doing sometimes is just racing ahead and getting all the way to the end of the project before we realise that it wasn't quite what we hoped it would be. And so actually Prince 2 encourages you to keep thinking all the way through the project. Is this doing what I want it to do? Is it still going the way I want it to go? And if not, don't be afraid to stop and rethink and change. And again, in terms of Producer Hub, I think it's something you're going to need to do as producers, is to keep track of this during your project and keep saying, is it doing what I want it to do? Because it's okay if it's not, if you want to change it. Another thing is learning from experience. A thing I would really encourage you all to do is every project you do from now on is an opportunity to build learning from project to project to project. And if you're like me, you forget things quite easily. And one of the best things you can do is write down your learning at the end of a project and go back to it before you start the next one. So we've done things like mural projects, and we will do a mural and learn lots of lessons. Some of them quite practical, like, oh, don't get your paint from that supplier. They always deliver late. Make a note of those things. And then before you start the next project, you can go back to them and go, what went badly last time, and do it again. Clear roles and responsibilities. Again, if it's just you, then everything is on you. Doing everything is all your job. If you're lucky enough to have people working with you, being really, really clear about who is doing what will make sure that things get done and get done well. And it's one of the biggest reasons why things go wrong on projects, is just someone didn't know it was their job to do something. So make sure you identify those. Manage it in stages. I think this is one of the things that really protects you from getting too far into a project before you can prevent something from going wrong. So break it down, a bit like how you do an eat an elephant, a little bit at a time. So bit by bit by bit. And then if at any point during a stage something goes wrong, you can always stop the project and restart it when you've corrected it. The worst thing you can do is sort of plow ahead when everything's falling apart around you. So breaking it down into stages and then saying to yourself, at what point am I going to review and check I'm still on track before I carry on, really helps with that. Again, if you can delegate to anyone at all, then do it. So part of project management is being a good delegator and being able to say to someone, I'd like you to this for me, please, and then leaving them alone to get on with it. And so we'll talk a bit about the art of delegation in a moment. Again, I appreciate sometimes it's just you, but if you are able to work with, graphic designers or set designers or, script writers or other artists who are doing parts of your project, then being able to delegate really helps. And then tailor it. So I'm going to talk to you about quite a comprehensive way of doing project management. I completely appreciate this may not suit all projects. So these principles you can apply to any project, even if the project is delivering one workshop in a school. But actually, if you're doing a major touring production, you might do a lot more than you would do for that. So just tailor your approach. These are things to think about, but particularly in Producer Hub, we don't expect you to do them all if it's not appropriate for your project scale. So I'm also going to argue that project management is actually the thing that happens after you've come up with the design of your project. So that little orange line on the slide is me saying it's not project initiation. And I'm going to argue that project initiation is the job of a producer. But project management is something that you can delegate to someone else. So you don't have to be a producer to do project management. You can separate it. And that might help to explain why at BCA we have Amy on the team who comes up with our program and she produces it. But we also have Bex, who's a project manager. Bex is very definitely not a producer. It's not that she's not creative, but that's just not what she's employed to do. She does the planning and logistical aspects of making a project happen. But Amy is the producer who makes it happen. The best analogy I think I can use to help make the distinction is building a house. You have the architect and then you have the builder. And I would argue that the producer is the architect. They create the specification, they design the house, they decide how many rooms it's going to have, how they're going to be laid out, where you're going to put the toilet and where you're going to put the kitchen. And then they make all the decisions that enable somebody to make that happen, but they don't necessarily do the building. If you're the builder, you're going to then make it happen, but you're not going to make those creative decisions about, oh, what does it look like? So in BCA, we split the roles. What you'll find is if you're a one-person band and you're both producer and project managers, you're going to do both things. But if you want to do bigger projects and upscale, that might be a distinction. You might say, I'm going to produce it, I'm going to be the designer and the creative and work out how to make it happen, but I'm going to delegate the project management. So I think project management is not that, but is everything after the orange line. So when we go back into the room as a cohort and we talk about your projects, we'll start with the initiation phase and we'll talk more about what are your ideas for your project. The stuff I'm talking about today is what happens after that. So we're doing a little bit backwards on that. So before you do the project management bit, what does the initiation phase look like? And as I say, we will do this in your next face-to-face session. And we will look at what your ideas are for your projects, even if they're very embryonic and you haven't got many yet. And we will work out what you're going to design as the architect of this wonderful project that you're going to deliver. So the producer will lead on what is the project? What am I actually going to do? Why am I doing it? What am I going to try and achieve by it? So who the audience is going to be? Who am I doing it for? Who am I doing it with? I'm going to bring the talent on board. I'm going to decide who I'm going to collaborate with and when, and make all of these decisions about how much it costs and build the budget and things. I'm going to get everything ready to sort of visualize before we actually get into the nitty-gritty. At that point, then they could appoint a project manager, unless you're wearing both hats, which I do appreciate. A lot of producers, they have to initiate the project and then they also have to make it happen. If you're doing a smaller project, it's likely to be you, but I'd make that distinction. Here's another illustration of that same thing. So the orange bit, if you like, is very much producing, but the blue bit is more project management. And a lot of producers straddle both roles. They end up doing all the creative architectural work and then they have to build the thing as well. But you can delegate some of that as well. But it just gives you a bit of a sense of when the producer is most active and when the project manager is. And here are some of the practical task list again as a table. So the producer is going to design it and define it, whereas the project manager will do things like set up practical systems and things. A lot of it is probably fairly administrative. It's things like, how are you going to do reporting? How are you going to communicate? What are you going to do about managing a budget? You're going to put it in Excel, or what kind of tools are you going to use? Gives you a bit of a sense of how it splits. And as I say, if you're on a small project and you're producing, you might find you have to do both. So let's look at planning. So if you're doing project management, you've come up with the idea of the project, you know what you want to do, you know when you want to do it, you know how you want to do it, and hopefully you've worked out how you're going to fund it. So you've either raised the money or you know where the money's coming from. Now you're ready to start planning. So what might that look like? You're going to work out your stages of planning. So your first phase is to plan the first stage of your project. So you might break your project down into multiple stages. If I give you an example of something like creating a piece of public art, and what you might do is decide you want to consult with the community and involve the community in the design and thought process about what that artwork is going to be. You might do that through workshops. And then there's a phase where an artist is going to produce the piece of public art and launch it. So you might have a first stage, which is planning, but then you might have a second stage, which is workshop and community delivery. Then you might go into another planning stage, and then you'll go into the design and build of the artwork, and then you'll go into a close down stage. So you can see how you break those stages down. So you might have a delivery stage, and then another planning stage, and then a delivery stage, and then another planning stage. So the first thing you need to do is plan the first stage of your project, and depending on how complicated it is, that may be all the planning you have to do. And what do you do in that phase? Well, you need to work out who you're working with. And again, I appreciate some of you are working on more, small projects. It might just be you, but hopefully it's not just you. Hopefully you might collaborate with other artists, or you might commission work out to marketing professionals, photographers, videographers, evaluators. If you're doing a performing arts project, there might be performers and stage managers and production personnel. Depends on your project. So you need to work out what the team is you need around you. And then you need to define those roles and responsibilities, because if you get that right, everything else is going to go really smoothly, and then you can delegate. You need to clarify those project stages that I just mentioned. How are you going to break this project down stage by stage by stage? Get them all set out. You need to work out how you're going to communicate with your team, what tools are you going to use, and how are you going to make sure that you've got a system for keeping track of the tasks and make sure that everything's being delivered. And then you can create probably plans within plans. A lot of people talk about, what is your project plan? Certainly at BCA, if we do a project plan, it's actually a plan of plans. It's lots of different plans, and together they create the project plan. But each one of those things is still going to cover those three very basic principles, which is it's going to say what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, and who's going to be doing it. Just make sure you always cover those three things. What am I doing? When do you need it by? Who's going to do it? Make that really, really clear. But I've listed on that left side some of the types of plans that might be within a project plan. So I'll go through them in a little bit more detail. So you might want to have a plan for where the money's coming from. Now, ideally, you would get the money in place, or at least know where it's coming from before you start the project. But it kind of depends on how you're funding it. So if it's a theatre show and it's predominantly being funded by ticket sales, the money's actually going to come in quite late. But you still need to have a plan for making sure you know how that money's going to come in. Is it going to come in from tickets? How many tickets are you going to sell? What prices are you going to ticket them for? That sort of thing. Are you going to sell program income? Are you going to sell refreshments? So you need some sort of plan for where the money's coming from. If you're using grant funding, it'll be a fundraising plan. You need to have a really nice detailed budget. And we've got a webinar which is going to cover both of these things on the 6th of February. So if you're thinking, I don't really know how to build a budget, I'm not very confident with that, or fundraising is new to me, try and catch that webinar. I'm afraid it's me again. But in that, we'll go through a detailed process for building a budget and using things like Excel to create a robust budget that funders like. And then we'll look a little bit at some forms of fundraising. So you're going to need that as part of your project plan, a really lovely detailed budget. I would strongly recommend you look at a community engagement plan, whatever sort of project you have is. All of the work that we do as creatives are for audiences. They're for people to enjoy as audiences or participants. And as much as selfishly we do it for ourselves, we also do it for them. And the best thing you can do to create the best quality work is to involve them in your project in some way, or at the very least, consult with them about your project so that they have some influence over it. One of the worst things I ever hear, particularly with schools work, is that people say, I came up with this idea for a schools workshop that I thought kids would absolutely love. And I've created this amazing workshop package here. And then I've run off to a load of schools and said, would you like this workshop program? And they've said, no, not this time. It doesn't align with the curriculum. Kids don't actually find it as interesting as you think, and they get really hurt and offended. And actually what they didn't do was involve teachers and young people in the design of the project. And the moment they sit down with a head teacher and say, can you help me design this workshop? Then it aligns with the curriculum. Then they get the feedback from the kids about what would work, and then they design a better product. So I think some sort of plan for how in your project you're going to engage the people you're doing it for in the work is worth thinking about. That we'll cover in one of our cohort sessions. A timeline. And again, if you do like a table where you say what needs to be done and when it needs to be done by, you'll find you've got a timeline. Or if you're good at things like Gantt charts, you could use Gantt chart, one of those things, but something that actually lets you work out, again, when things need to be done. and you can look at dependencies. So perhaps, you can't start rehearsing a show if you haven't written the script yet. So some things are going to be dependent on others. Lots of funders like to see them. A marketing plan. How are you going to promote the work? How are you going to get your audiences in? What does that look like? And we're going to have a marketing specialist, not me, come to talk to you on the 11th of June next year about marketing specifically, so they can talk a bit more about how that's done. An evaluation framework. If you are being funded, your funder is going to want to know how things went, and you're going to need to set up a system for being able to report on that. So it might include getting audience feedback and that kind of thing. We'll talk about evaluation frameworks in your last cohort session, and you'll find out about how to build an evaluation framework. I would recommend, even if you're not being funded, that you should always evaluate your own work. It's just really, really good to learn those lessons and sit down and say, did I achieve what I set out to do or not? And what did I learn along the way? And a quality impact assessment. So that is a way of actually being able to assess, are people from a variety of different backgrounds going to be affected differently by the project I do? It's quite a local authority term, but I actually quite like it. And it encourages you to think about people from different protected characteristics or different backgrounds, and to say, in what way are they going to be affected by my project? And can I change it to make it better for them to be able to equally access the work that I'm doing? So you might sit down and think about people of different ages and say, oh, might they be affected differently by it? Is there something I can change? People of different abilities, for example, do you need to include interpretation for people who may need it because they need BSL or they need an ESL interpreter, that sort of thing. And we're going to talk a little bit about those sorts of things at the webinar on the 24th of April. And I can show you frameworks for doing that kind of work. Environmental impact. It's a good thing to do, and I'm afraid certainly the Arts Council and lots of other funders really want you to think about it. Again, think of that Prince 2 principle of tailoring it. I'm not saying you have to write War and Peace in a massive document for an environmental impact framework, but do have a bit of a think about it, even if it's as simple as, do you know what, when I'm doing this workshop, I'm going to take 2 bin bags with me, one for recycling and one for grey waste, and make sure that I do separate my waste. Or do you know what, I'm going to actually look at the credentials of the suppliers I'm getting my materials from and check their green credentials before I order from them. I'm going to try and buy local if I can. If I'm providing catering, I'm going to make sure it's vegetarian because that's lower carbon impact. There's lots of things you can think about. If you'd like to know more about that, let me know. But increasingly, funders are going to ask you about, have you considered the environmental impact, and have you done something to minimise the impact? A strategic risk assessment. This is something that funders increasingly ask you to provide. This is not a health and safety risk assessment. So if you're doing activities that have a risk to people's health and their safety, you'll want to risk assess those. If you've never done that before, again, talk to one of your mentors about advice in how to do it. But what funders are often looking for is a strategic risk assessment that looks at the risks to the project not going ahead. So this is not about, might someone get hurt? This is about, what risks are there that I'm going to give you this money and then the project isn't going to happen, or it's going to go wrong. So they're looking much more at things like, what happens if you have a terrible accident and fall ill and can no longer to deliver? What would happen then? Or what happens if one of your other funders pulls out, or your leading performer falls ill, or the venue you were going to use goes into administration? Do you have a backup plan? So that's an exercise worth doing. An archive plan. I'm a big fan of this. I've seen lots of arts organisations create beautiful pieces of work, whether it's performances or visual artworks. They always think about producing it. They never think about what they do when the project comes to an end. Our store was loaded with stuff when I came to BCA, and you just think, oh, we can't just keep everything we ever make. So there needs to be a plan for what happens to it at the end of the project. Are you going to sell it? Are you going to give it back to the artist? Are you going to throw it in the bin, recycle it? But it's worth thinking about that before you embark on the project, because there might be costs associated with disposing of it. Or if you are going to sell it and you've commissioned it from someone else, you need to think about, actually, do I owe them money if I sell it? How does that work? Do we split the income? Is it going to tour? I don't know. Depends on what it is that you're creating. But I would really encourage you to plan for the archive process at the end. And a debrief process. You're going to sit down as part of your evaluation at the end of the project and have a period where you reflect. And it's worth planning that in, because the danger is you bring a team together to do a project, you have the last night of the show or the exhibition closes or whatever it is, and everybody scatters, and then you can't get hold of them again because they all move on to the next thing. So at the beginning of the project, plan for those moments for how and when you're going to sit down with them and say, let's reflect on how it went, because that is gold dust for your learning for your next project, but also for evaluation. But remember, if you want to create any one of these plans, all I would sit down is to say, in the context of that topic, can you identify what you think you should do, when you think you should do it, and who's going to do it if it's not you? Here are some template examples in case you wondered what an example might look like. This is a very simple one, and I'm very aware that Arts Council now tend to ask for a project plan in a particular section of granting. And this is basically what they ask for. They want to have a date, they want to have an item of activity, and they want you to say what's doing. And that is, as I say, the crudest version of a project plan you can do is just this table. It's just what, when, and who. And there's an example of what it looks like. It does what you need it to do. It clarifies all the tasks. Someone like Arts Council is going to look at it and they want it not to be hugely detailed, but they do want to see that you do know what you're doing, and they're going to run certain tests on it, such as, has this person allowed sufficient time to do this stuff? If they crammed it all into a week and they don't think that's achievable, you won't get the funding. If you've dragged it out over a really long period, they might raise an eyebrow and go, why does it take so long to do that, Faith? If you've put everything against your name, they're going to go, is that realistic? Do you really have the capacity to do all those things? So they're going to interrogate this a bit, but they don't necessarily need a huge amount of detail. It just needs to be clear and logical. And a template like this is good enough for most funding. Again, tailor it to the scale of your grant. If you're asking for 10,000, this is fine. If you're asking for 150,000, they'd expect it to be more detailed. Here's another possible layout of a plan, which kind of begins to build in a Gantt chart into it. This is a snapshot of a section of Excel where we've done a project this way and we've said which area the project relates to. So maybe it's a project with lots of commissions, and commission 1 has got some tasks in. We've got a column for listing the tasks, another column for adding a bit of detail about what it means, a space to assign it to a team member, and then we start to colour in pink when that thing needs to happen. And what you then end up with is a Gantt chart, which just has lots of colourful blocks that show you when stuff is happening. The advantage of this format is, of course, if you use a Gantt chart, you can see where things conflict, where you suddenly have like a busy week where you've got 30 things happening at once, and you can go, oh, that's not going to work. That team member can't spread themselves that thinly. Or you might realise that something needs to be pulled back or forward in order to create those interdependencies. Just another layout. No right or wrong way of doing it. Some people don't like Excel. Some people like to use software. So one thing we also do at BCA is we use a piece of software. This happens to be a snapshot of a piece of software called Asana. Loads of other different software tools available out there in the world. Asana is free if you want to use the basic version and you don't want to use all the timeline functionality. And all it really allows you to do is to add tasks, link them to an individual and give them a deadline. But again, you get that lovely context of what needs to be done, who's going to do it, when it needs to be done by. And you can actually collaborate with multiple people in different organisations. So anyone has their own Asana account can be linked to this. So you can see here, I've done a very simple example where I've created project management, marketing, evaluation, different kind of boards of lists, and started to assign tasks and put deadlines in. So you can get a sense of how something like that might work. That would count as a project plan. That is a project plan. It does the 3 things. It works out what, when, and who. This is a health and safety risk assess template. So if you've not seen a risk assessment for health and safety, may be unfamiliar to you. It shows you how risks are scored in terms of likelihood and severity. And you can get a bit of a sense of a suggested way of categorizing those. So what is the health and safety risk? What measures might you already have in place? Who's going to make sure those measures are in place? How high risk is it? And then what else do you need to do, and who and when? What you may not be so familiar with is doing that for strategic risk. And as I say, at a planning stage, as a project manager, you might be doing health and safety risk assessments, but you'll probably also need to be looking at strategic risk. 3 examples of strategic risks are financial risks, what happens about the money, either if costs go up or income goes down, what happens about operational risks, and what about reputational ones, which is also worth thinking about. What if, something goes wrong and you cause your funders or yourself to have problems with your reputation? What can you do to control it? And it's just an exercise in asking yourself, can I do anything about it? And if I can, what would I do and who would do it? So that's all the planning stuff. Then once you've gone past planning, you're ready to do your first delivery stage, or maybe your only delivery stage, where you actually do stuff. What does that look like? Well, here's another suggestive breakdown of different stages of a project. This example is a community co-created exhibition, and we've suggested 7 stages for that. So a stage of planning where you set up the team and start planning, the first stage. Then a stage where you deliver some community workshops if you're going to co-create with the community. Then you might have a phase where you plan again and you design the exhibition. Then an install phase. Then delivery of the exhibition, but you might run further workshops. And then a phase where you take it down. And then a phase where you debrief. So suddenly that project has become 7 different phases. And you keep going around that cycle of plan what you're going to do in that stage, delegate the tasks out to people, make sure they're done. If things go wrong, so for example, in the community workshops, if you got huge community backlash and they went, we really don't want an exhibition, it would be a bit silly to go straight to designing the exhibition. So by breaking it down in stages, you can go, whoa, hang on. Let's just check that this project is still working before we move to the next stage. So making sure you're happy with each stage before you move to the next one just helps you have a bit of control. If the budget starts to slip at the workshop stage, do you need to redesign the exhibition to have a smaller budget to keep within your project budget? Those sorts of questions. If you just rush on and try and plan the exhibition at the same time as the workshops and run out of money, you're going to get into trouble. If the install goes out of budget, does that mean you're going to have to cut the workshops that you would otherwise do during the run and reduce them? Breaking it down into stages and just keep thinking to yourself, oh, am I on track? Just helps. Delegating. Like I said, I fully appreciate that for some of you, this may be luxury, but I'd like to think you'll do increasingly more ambitious projects and you'll have teams involved, and delegating is more of an art than you might imagine, particularly in project management terms. So you need to clarify when you delegate what it is they need to be done, what's the task, or what is it that someone's going to produce for you, and be as specific as you possibly can. And be really clear what's their decision, what's your decision. Try not to be too vague. Let them know how much money they've got to spend on it if they need to spend money. We tend to break our budgets down for our projects into sections. So there's a marketing section of the budget, there's a workshop section of the budget, or an event section of the budget. And then we can delegate management of those budget sections out to different people. Is there a deadline for when you want it to be done by? So many people have problems where they go, can you do this for me? Oh, thanks very much. And they forget to say when they need it for. And you just assume the person will do it quite quickly, but they might not. So being really clear immediately and saying, can I have it done by then, please? Thank you. Is there a quality standard? This might sound a bit silly, but let's say you're delegating the production of a leaflet. It doesn't matter what paper it goes on. Can it be, does it need to be the really firm, card-like, heavyweight paper with the nice sheen, or can it be just a, cheap and cheap, shiny stuff? I don't know, kind of up to you, but clarify that. And then, does the person you're delegating to have any flexibility on the quality budget or deadline or not? In Prince 2 terms, we would call this a tolerance. What's my tolerance? When you say I've got £500 to spend, if I really needed 550, could I have it? Or is that no? The other thing is, you might find that if you've got funding, you don't want a surplus at the end of it because you'd have to give it back to the funder, and you might not want to do that. So you don't want to delegate someone £500 for marketing and they turn around and said, turns out I only needed 400, and you go, oh no, I've got £100. I've got to work out what to spend it by Tuesday because that's when the grant funder wants the evaluation. Nice problem to have, but can be a problem. So you might say there's no flexibility on, budget either way. And also things like deadlines. Again, I really like it for Thursday, but if you have to have them until Monday, that's fine. Just shows them if there's a tolerance or not. What checkpoints are they going to be required? So if we go back to the example of a piece of print, if someone's going to produce a leaflet for you, do you want to sign off the wording before it goes to design? Do you want to then sign off the design? Do you want to see a hard copy before you let them get distributed? You might create 3 checkpoints. I probably would for a piece of print. I'd say, I want to see the copy before it goes to the designer. I want to see the design, to sign it off before it goes to print. And then I want to see the print and make sure it has printed correctly before it gets distributed to all of the venues. So then by telling the person you're delegating it to that the checkpoints, then it's the project manager, you keep the control. But once you've done that, you can leave them to it. I've been really clear what I want doing, to what quality standard, with what money, by what deadline. Sort yourself out and just come to me if there's a problem and you can't do it. And just clarify what the communication processes are for escalating it. And at what point they hand it over to you and step away, job done. So there is an art to delegating. This is actually quite a lot to do as a project manager, but when you're working with a team, and the bigger the team gets, the harder it is, the more it's important that as project manager or producer, if you're doing both, that you're keeping control of all this stuff. This is just a reminder that these 3 things are completely interlinked when it comes to projects. If you pull one, it automatically affects both of the others. If you reduce the amount of money that you have, that may well affect the quality standard that you can reach. It may also mean that it takes longer to do or less time to do because you can't do as much. So they are all going to be influenced. If you take more time to do a project, it might cost more money because you might have to pay people for longer, but the quality might go up. It's just something when you're planning projects to be aware of. If you have to change one of these things, if you have to squeeze the budget, you have to squeeze the timeline, think about it or how it also impacts the quality. You can change one of these things, but you just need to be aware of the impact on the other. So, initiation, we've said the producer does that before you get to the project management point, then you do planning, then you make stuff happen. But don't forget to close it down carefully at the end. And what does that look like? It's really easy to just run off at the end of a project and go, yay, that was amazing. It's all done now and you're off. But make sure you close it down really carefully. So I would reconcile your budget. Make sure that that budget is really covered. So if you've planned to spend money, did you spend it? Has the invoice come in? Has it been paid? Is everything up to date? There is nothing worse than thinking all your invoices are in and closing down and thinking that you've, broken even, and then suddenly a massive bill comes in later and you think, oh no, I didn't know that was coming. I'd forgotten about it. So make sure you reconcile the budget before you tell the funders everything is done. They'll probably want to see an outturn. Lots of funders want to see, well, what was the outturn? What was the final position on your budget? Debrief with everybody. At BCA, we do different debriefs with different people. So we will debrief as a team, as a group of staff, about what we thought went well, what didn't go so well, what lessons we learned. We'll also debrief with the artistic talent quite often and say, what did you think? What was your experience as an artist? Debrief with partners. We might debrief with communities in a particular way. And then all of that information comes together. And then from that, you can document your lessons learned. And like I said, that's really helpful. If you're going to start doing lots of projects over time, it's really good to be able to go back to a document at the end and say, I did a mural a couple of years ago. What did I learn when I did that mural? Let me just go back to the lessons learned and have a look and go, oh yes, I remember now. I remember that you really mustn't paint in snowy February because the paint freezes and the artist gets cold up a cherry picker. Just a random example. Analyze evaluation data. So that's the moment where you get any evaluation data you've got, which depends on your framework, and have a look, and you can report it to your funders and stakeholders. I would recommend you report to your stakeholders, even if they don't ask you to. It's a really good way of developing relationships over time. So some funders will be very specific. Yes, please, I want this feedback. Some people are also quite bad at taking a donation from a funder, someone like Girl Family Trust. You go, oh, there's your money, and we don't really need any feedback. And then they go, okay, great, thanks very much for the money. And then they forget ever to go back to them and go, thanks so much for that money. We did this with it. Here it is. What do you think? It really, really builds a fantastic relationship over time. So think about how you can tell all of your stakeholders, whether they're participants, partners, artists, about what you've done. And then do the archiving thing. So as I said at the beginning, plan to archive before you start the project, and then actually make sure you allow time to do it. If you are applying for grants, you can include close down as part of the project. And one of the things that I think freelancers sometimes do is they fund the project and the project ends when the art ends. So like if it's a theatre show, the last show ends, all the audiences clap, everybody leaves, and then the money is just gone. And actually you can get funding for this phase too. So make sure you build in the costs of doing your close down. So if you need to be paid for your time to do debriefs, put it in your project budget. If you need to pay your stakeholders to come to debrief meetings and cover their travel costs, put it in your project budget. If you need to produce a lovely report and you're going to take photographs or print it on glossy paper and post it out, put it in your project budget. Make sure you cover this phase and put it in your timeline as well. So when you build that project plan timeline, especially if it goes to the funders, put all of the meetings and debrief process in. It's a really good way, if you're a freelancer, of making sure that you're paid for your time in between projects. So if you're not going to be paid again until the next project starts, making sure you've covered your costs of working on your close down phase also allows you some time to be planning your next project. So that is my presentation on project management. So if I haven't sent you all to sleep and anyone has any questions, you're very welcome to ask them now. But please be aware that we're still recording because it's quite helpful for people to hear about that. Are there any questions in the chat? No, nothing in the chat. Any questions at all?
No, it was really clear, very clear.
Thanks, Kay.
Yeah, no questions yet. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, I just had one. I just had one question. Thank you for that, Elaine. When it comes to delegating, which I think is a totally fantastic idea, but sometimes I held back from delegating because I hadn't it hadn't been built into the project plan. And then if I delegate to you, then I may have to pay you to actually do the things for which I'm delegating. And I didn't feel like I should. I was doing a lot of extra things, but I don't want to necessarily I don't know, impede on people's goodwill, etc. And so I ended up doing a lot rather than sometimes delegating to others who probably could have done it perfectly well. But I'm like, well, I'm not sure I have the budget for this. Therefore, I didn't delegate sometimes. Yeah. So I'm wondering if there's a way around it. And is it fair to ask people on your team, hey, we're a big team, do you mind doing this for free? Or I don't know. That's just one of the conundrums for me, that if it's not in the plan, plans change, but delegation then means extra costs, doesn't it?
It does. And I think the key thing there really is about, that feels like a bit of a contingency question, doesn't it? It's like you say, if you knew it was going to happen, you'd budget for it and budget the cost of people's time to do it. If it comes up as an unexpected thing, that is a bit of a producer's call as to, can I cut costs in order to be able to then spend the money on these things? Do I say, oh, I can't do the project because it can't be done anymore with the time? Or do I do it? I would if people are going to donate their time, including yourself, what I normally do is I put it in the budget as a donation. I don't know if that sounds confusing, but let's say I go, I spent 2 more days on this than I budgeted for, and I accept that that was my fault. I should have budgeted for 2 more days, and I just did it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in income the cost of those 2 days as a donation from me.
Like support in kind, like support in kind.
Exactly.
Mhm.
But I'm making the point to the funder and to myself when I look back
Yeah.
on it that actually that cost me more than I did.
Yeah.
I probably account for it in that way, but it is, as you say, it's a difficult thing. And I do think it's a skill of producers to go, how do I just try and avoid being in that situation on the next project by allowing enough time? And sometimes the only way you know is by doing enough projects that you begin to get a better and better and better sense each time as to how much time it takes to do those things so that you can build it in future. Yeah. But I think if you are going to ask someone to do something for free, I think just make it, I'm aware that I can't pay you for this. I am aware that I'm asking you to do this. You know, it would be very kind of you to do this for me for free, and then let the Arts Council know that you've had to do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think one of the things I'm finding with projects it is the lining things up and how much time that takes, and then of course that's time that I'm not being paid for, and it's really then difficult. I'm just even on mini pieces of work that I'm being employed to do, and that's something that I don't really know how to cover, because it is work, and then it decreases the amount of pay that I'm getting because actually I've spent like how X number of days or hours trying to line up the work.
Yeah.
Or create the project.
It's really, really hard. I get the impression the invention of the Developing Your Creative Practice grant by the Arts Council was an attempt to try and create a route where people could get some money for their time as freelancers to do those kinds of in-between things. The only way I think I've ever found anyone who gets out of it is by whacking up their rate, actually, which is hard because I know there's always that. Am I going to lose out to someone else if my day rate's higher than someone else's? But sometimes when you are being paid, you're being paid a bit more than you feel you need.
Yeah.
It helps compensate you for the times when having to do a bit extra. The other thing is, I think, don't be afraid to ask. Not everyone can afford to pay, but you never know when someone may just have not thought about it. And if you say, I would love to come to the planning meeting, I can give you 1 planning meeting for free. If you want to keep talking to me about this project, then I'm going to need to be paid at least half my day rate. And then they go, oh, okay, yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Wouldn't work with the local authority. They just go, oh, well, it can't happen then. I haven't got any money. But might work with someone like BCA where we go, okay. And we've started to, if we ask people to, artists to create an outline proposal for us to commission for something, we might not fund their payment for that. If they then get brought to an interview where they have to travel and stuff like that, we pay sometimes a small day rate for their attendance at interview. And if we want them to work up a full proposal with budget and all that kind of stuff, we pay them to do the proposal. But again, it only depends on whether we've got the funding to do that at that point. It is really tough. But that's why I think the paying for an extended close down in your project phase is a cheeky way of also being able to cover your costs of what you're going to do next.
Definitely, it's a good idea.
It's the only trick I have, I'm afraid. Any other questions from anyone else? You might find the budgeting and fundraising webinar really useful, actually, in that sense.
Yes,
cover some of this stuff, I think, then may or may not be helpful. Any questions from anyone? Cheryl, Michael, James?
Yeah. I think I don't know if Michael's trying to talk as well, but I'll just, jump in quickly. I had more of a, thank you, this is really, really helpful. So I had more of a technical question on the recording. Will we be able to access this sort of ongoing? Because, there's a lot of stuff to take in and I would appreciate re-listening to it when I'm actually
Absolutely. We'll send this link to all of the Producer Hub guys so you can watch it back. We'll load it to somewhere where you can watch it.
It'll stay put. Yeah, amazing. Yeah, thank you. This has been
And
really
then we'll
helpful.
give you the slides as well, so you've got them as a PDF.
Lovely. Yeah, great. Thanks.
Michael, were you trying to ask a question? I don't think we could hear you actually then. Or he's typing. Any other questions? No, he's saying thank you. Good. Okay. It's easier said than done. I also appreciate that. We don't profess to be experts at actually executing it. We try and practice what we preach, but it's tough. I used to oversee a team where we used to do kind of £2.5 million festivals and stuff like that, and you had to be very on this kind of thing. But it's tough, and I appreciate it's really tough when you're part, on your own or part of a small team. Cool. Well, if there's any other questions you have, or you want to know more and dig into a particular aspect of something, and find out more about it, then please reach out to either me or Matthew, who knows all about the content I'm giving you today, so he'll know what you're talking about. And then we can mentor you individually and try and help you with applying any of this stuff.
I do have a question. It's because I'm setting up by myself. I don't have things like project initiation forms. Did I see that there was an example one somewhere? Am I
Yeah,
just
say that
making
again,
that
like
up?
a project initiation form, did you say?
Yes, yeah. Because as I saw your project initiation, of course, I'm setting myself up now by myself. Whereas, of course, if I was in an arts organisation, I'd be meeting and doing these things more formally. But actually, it would be really helpful for me to think about that kind of thing. And I just wondered if you had an example.
Yeah, I mean, I can send you the one I give Amy to use as a project brief.
Yeah, that would be
She
wonderful.
just fills it in for me for all of her projects, but it just prompts those questions in your head.
Exactly. When you sit down and think about it, if you have it in front of you, yeah, that would be
Yeah.
wonderful. Thank you.
No, you're very welcome. Anything else from anyone else?
I was going to say, yeah, thank you very much, Elaine, for that. I was going to just say, we have a survey that will be coming your way, so please kindly spend a few minutes and fill it in.
Yes. As you know, we're also funded, so you're going to be surveyed to death about the Producer Hub as well. And then it just helps us adapt the content for future if we need to adapt anything. So yes, please do fill in the survey, but we'll make sure we get the link out to the recording and the PDF file out to you as well. Otherwise, it's 6 o'clock, so we've made good time. Thank you so much for your time today. And I think I'm not likely to see many of you now until the new year, in which case I hope you have a lovely festive period if you get to do something nice over it and enjoy the bank holidays. And Happy New Year, and we will see you again in January.
Yes. Happy New Year. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year,
Christmas.
everyone.
Merry Christmas,
Bye.
everyone.
Good
Take care.
Year,
Thanks so
everyone.
much.
Bye.